Who lived on Earth before the dinosaurs? Dinosaurs are one of the few ancient creatures on Earth, even older than humans. When all the dinosaurs became extinct, exactly 65 million years later, the first man was born on Earth. But currently this animal impresses us the most, be it their size or body structure, or lifestyle. Almost everything attracts us to them, which is very natural. Because dinosaurs were large animals whose fossils had accumulated on Earth for a long time, which is why we know so much about this extinct animal. But have you ever thought about who was before the dinosaurs? Were dinosaurs the first living animals, or did someone rule the Earth before that? Let's know how the world was at that time. Our world has never been so peaceful and habitable. There was a time when there was no difference between Earth and Mars. About 4 billion years ago, the first organisms appeared on Earth. But about 1.5 billion years ago, the Earth's shape was completely different. At that time our world was going through various events and various objects of the solar system were being formed, and because of this many rocky objects were hitting the Earth, and at that time the Earth's cast was made up of molten magma, which caused different types of pacing objects to break this cast to hit the Earth. However, after 1 billion years of this event, things that can be called the first pillars of life began to appear on Earth. At that time the surface of the Earth was very smooth. The tectonic plates that formed today's great mountains were then plains. Back then our atmosphere had only 0% oxygen and the Earth was covered in water vapor and carbon. At that time the sun's rays were much less than today. According to reports, sunlight was 30% less than today. So it would not be wrong to say that our planet was a dark place then. Then our moon was very close to Earth, for which one day was 10 hours. For the moon at that time the sea waves were up to 300 meters high. Then, as the Earth cools, the water in atmosphere begins to fall as rain. At that time the rainwater was very salty and hot. The strange thing is that in these conditions the primitive form of life first arose and from here began to change, and then the anaerobic organisms were born that did not need oxygen to survive. This organism could not survive. And for this live in a place called the substrate, which is a place where organisms move and change. As the Earth cooled rapidly and the oceans rose, the sun slowly grew larger, increased the costile area where life could have originated. At that time there were rivers and seas in the world where life did not originate. If a water diver went into the water at that time, he would only see some structures like sedimentary rocks in the form of living organisms. These rocks were several meters tall and were made of primitive microorganisms at a time when there were no scavengers to keep the ocean clean, by eating the dead organisms. For which many dead organisms floated on the surface of the ocean for millions of years and which has been transformed into the present oil field. About 3.50 billion years ago some creature was born who changed the color and shape of the Earth. Some bacteria have learned the process of photosynthesis, which leads to oxygen production. After that, the Earth first extended, because as more and more bacteria were born that used oxygen, anaerobic organisms began to die out. This is called the Great Oxidation Event. No fossils of this time are found. Our Earth had a high level of atmosphere methane, so the temperature was very high, but as the methane decreased, the temperature of the planet decreased. Then finally the uranium glacier was born, which was the most active ice age that lasted on Earth for about 300 million years when our Earth became an ice-covered sphere. It took about 1.5 billion years for the Earth to turn from boiling lava to an icy desert, but that time on Earth's primitive life or life rate did not mean that 400 million years ago, most living organisms began living in coastal areas near equity. At that time, very strange things were happening in the land area of the Earth. 500 million years ago, the Earth and Mary planet looked almost the same, but the creatures of the Earth were more lucky. The sun's rays were bright and warm. Finally, all the ice began to melt, then came the Phanerozoic Eon. At this time all creatures were born who were visible, i.e. they could be seen with the eyes. Gradually different types of Pisces started to evolve. Again, some pieces become strict. That time was not like the present day. Then there was a large space or continent which was made up of present-day Africa, South America, Antarctica, Australia and Indian peninsulas and other parts of Asia. 444 million years ago no life of any size could have evolved on Earth. Earth's first plants were formed between the Titan area and the river. But the creatures of maiden life were evolving differently and new species were being born. But all of them were confined to the coastal area. This is because most of the organisms in the sea could make their own food through photosynthesis, and at that time in the water depth of 10 meters these organisms could survive through photosynthesis, for which they lived close to the ocean floor. But at present these organisms have learned to do photosynthesis in 100 meters depth of the sea. Not only that, between 420 to 358 million years, the first decomposer animal was born. This organism started eating dead matter, and the next period is called Carbonic era. That ranged from 358 to 299 million. This organism could not survive. And for this live in a place called the substrate, which is a place where organisms move and change. As the earth cooled rapidly and the oceans rose, the sun slowly grew larger, increased the costile area where life could have originated. At that time there were rivers and seas in the world where life did not originate. If a water diver went into the water at that time, he would only see some structures like sedimentary rocks in the form of living organisms. These rocks were several meters tall and were made of primitive microorganisms at a time when there were no scavengers to keep the ocean clean, by eating the dead organisms. For which many dead organisms floated on the surface of the ocean for millions of years and which has been transformed into the present oil field. About 3.50 billion years ago some creature was born who changed the color and shape of the earth. Some bacteria have learned the process of photosynthesis, which leads to oxygen production. After that, the earth first extended, because as more and more bacteria were born that used oxygen, anaerobic organisms began to die out. This is called the Great Oxidation Event. No fossils of this time are found. Our Earth had a high level of atmosphere methane, so the temperature was very high, but as the methane decreased, the temperature of the planet decreased. Then finally the Uranium Glacier was born, which was the most active ice age that lasted on Earth for about 300 million years. Thank you for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel for more videos like this.